I'll start with maybe a question for each of you, kind of in sequence, starting with Norm. Given where your project is today, what is likely to be the single one or two biggest challenges to seeing it kind of fully adopted?
The first couple of challenges with this concept is we have to get a large number of electric vehicles on the road, because putting in massive infrastructure to power them on the road requires about 70 to 80% of the vehicles traveling to be electrified. So you need to get a base level put in, which is going to take 10 to 15 years at least. Once we've done that, we need to go through the couple of, I saw a couple surprises about that. I think it's going to be adopted a lot faster than we think, because we're going to start finding issues with petroleum once you get 50% of vehicles converted to electricity. And that will drive us over. The last half will take not nearly as long. The second issue is we do have some technology changes, and I don't know whether batteries are going to become so cheap and so light that you don't build the infrastructure, or whether you get hung up in battery development and you have to move to a different kind of infrastructure in order to move all the way. So those kinds of technology changes are important.
Great.
Same question. For us, it's timing. I mentioned the approvals that we need from the Federal Railroad Administration at the US DOT. You know, if those two approvals are on pace for this summer, we start construction and you're riding the train in 2026. Then it becomes a logistics challenge, because we've got to build 240 miles. We'll build it all simultaneously, 10 different segments. Workforce keeps us up at night. You know, materials availability keeps us up at night. We've got great partners, but the logistics of using, 3 times the amount of concrete that went into building Hoover Dam, getting it in the right place at the right time when it's not 102 degrees and you can actually pour it. All of those logistics are going to be a big challenge.
Okay, great. Joe,
Absolutely.
yours?
So top two, I would say, are technology and adoption. So on the technology front, of course, building autonomy software is hard. Norm told me that the first time I met him, a couple minutes into our conversation. And that is a difficult thing because people are unpredictable. The vehicles that we've had out on the road, as you might imagine, when people see them for the first time, they sometimes decide to gawk, sometimes they decide to take pictures, and all while they're driving, so not the safest situation. On the adoption front, our goal is to drive down the cost of delivery to the point that it's essentially free. But what that does mean is that people are going to their curbs to retrieve their own items. There's a joke on Twitter that is quite apt to our company, which is, on one hand, people are so lazy that they don't want to go to the grocery store anymore. On the other hand, like, what the heck, I have to go to the curb to get my stuff, right? So there is a thread that we are essentially trying to balance on.
Okay, great. Nina?
So for us, on the technology front, it's definitely batteries. So the better performance improvement we can get in batteries from a specific energy perspective is really important. And then, of course, the stability of those batteries from a safety and reliability perspective. Because unlike a self-driving car where you can stop and pull over with an aircraft, obviously you have to have enough energy to come in and land safely. So that's a challenge on the technology front. And then I think the bigger one, however, is public acceptance. Because for a lot of people, when they think of personal air travel, they think of it for the rich and famous, flying around in helicopters in Monaco. So the whole point here is to drive down the price of these vehicles so that we can have something which is affordable for everybody, and then people feel comfortable actually using that as a service.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we'll move to the audience questions, and the first one is for Norm. Can our electric power grid keep up if massive numbers of people buy electric cars and charge them at home at night or at other locations?
The question about the electric grid, the amount of volume of energy volume that we have to add in order to electrify the fleet is not that much. It's about 10 to 15% of the total electricity generated today in the US. So it's not an insurmountable amount of additional power that needs to be done. The question about whether I have enough power delivery capacity to charge at night, the answer in most cases is we already have that in place. But there are some, because of peak demand for power in Texas is during the summer in the air conditioning peak in the afternoon. So if you're charging at night, you probably have plenty of wires to deliver that power existing. If not, CenterPoint and others have plenty of means of putting that in. The issue is, as we move more toward renewable energy, which is intermittent and comes during the summer peak sun time if it's solar, or in the evening or night if it's wind, we need some battery technology in order to provide that during the middle of the drop when we don't have renewable as available. So that's also another technology that's going to demand battery support to stabilize the grid.
Okay. The next one is for the entire panel. Well, maybe we'll start at the other end here with Anita. In your opinion, what's the single most effective policy or market incentive to accelerate EV adoption? We're all talking about effectively different types of electric vehicles, so I think it's relevant for all. What do you think is the most single policy or market incentive to accelerate adoption?
I guess I have a little bit of bias too here because I want to see a shift over to renewables. So I think governments, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, mandating timelines to get to fully renewable energy supply, because that then couples to a more efficient energy source to get your electric vehicles going. So that would be number one thing, is getting us to 100% renewable by X decade.
I certainly agree with that. I think that that will definitely be sort of the bottom. At the top end, of course, is that the vehicles have to be attractive, they have to be well priced, and they have to be competitive with what exists today. And so I think from the policy perspective, the most that the government can do is essentially mandate this floor. But from an incentive perspective, people really have to get what they want from the vehicle to adopt it.
For us, it goes back to the timing of the regulatory process. And, businesses want certainty. And if you're going to tell me yes or you're going to tell me no, just tell me when you're going to tell me. And I can live with that. And so I think that would be, making sure that it is a full process, but putting some certainty around the timing of it.
For me, I have a different view. I think that our best regulatory approach that we can take is to implement a carbon fee and dividend policy that provides for a huge amount of innovation, but make sure that everybody who's polluting with fossil fuel emissions is paying the price. And by doing so, we're going to raise the attractiveness of renewable and electric vehicles, along with everything else that we can do to protect climate. That's what our ultimate objective is to make sure we have a habitable world.
Okay, well, we'll shift a little bit slightly to autonomous vehicle and autonomous vehicle infrastructure. And one of the questions is, how will we ensure cybersecurity with this future autonomous vehicle infrastructure when you think about all the aspects of it, the vehicles, the signaling, the charging stations, and all of that? Anita, we'll start with you again.
Well, I'm not an expert on cybersecurity protocols, but it certainly is super, super important. Otherwise, there's potential for terrorist incidents and things like that. So unfortunately, I couldn't speak to you as to what the solution is, but it's a really important one, and it has to be coupled from a regulatory side as well as a technical side.
Okay.
Yeah, if she's not an expert, I'm definitely.
Okay, you can pass.
Well, I don't think I'm an expert either. For us, it's multifaceted because it's the systems that are communications within the operations of the railroad, as well as then when you are a passenger on the railroad and you're connecting via 5G at this point and doing all those kinds of things, or it's a secure transaction when you're purchasing your ticket. And our real view is, somebody said mobility as a service earlier. You as a customer will want us to get you either from your desk to your desk or your couch to your couch, not the station to the station, and making sure that not only are our systems secure, but those interfaces with, rideshare, with rental cars, with whatever your last mile solution is going to be, is seamless and safe as well.
Yes. I'm going to pass.
Okay. This is specifically for Holly. A couple of questions. One, what will the load be on the grid when the train is moving at 200 miles an hour and it's full?
And it's what?
And it's full. The train is full.
So it's at 125 kilovolts, and my handy dandy engineers gave me the exact amounts that I'm going to look at because they think they're funny and they give me examples, but they don't give me numbers sometimes. And so when we are at our acceleration, we'll be at 12 megawatts. And when we're cruising at 200 miles an hour, then I think it was actually on the slide earlier, and it's going to be at about 6.
Okay. Another question for you, maybe a little bit more practical. What will the cost of a ticket be?
I've gotten that question before,
I'll let
strangely.
you know.
So one of the things that we know is that when you go between Houston and Dallas, 90% of you drive. So our market is cars and getting folks out of their cars into a cleaner alternative. And so we will price competitively with vehicles. We know that we will get the market share of flying just because we'll be faster, more reliable. So you think our pricing will be from less than $100 to less than an airplane ticket, depending on, and it'll be dynamic pricing like a hotel. What's going on? Did you just walk up and buy a ticket at 7:30 on Monday morning, or is it off-peak Tuesday afternoon and you bought it 2 weeks in advance? So it will be dynamic, and in 6 years, it'll be competitive to those.
Okay. We'll shift back to a kind of higher level question for the whole panel, maybe start with Norm. The question is, with a statement first, electric vehicles are not without pollution. It's just shifted to power plants which aren't that efficient, and many are coal-fired. Isn't this just externalizing pollution and straining overload on power systems?
That's a common myth. The issue is, an electric vehicle is exceptionally efficient at using the power that it has. So once you get the power to it, the question is, where did that come from? In the Texas grid today, about 30% to 35% of it is non-carbon emitting. 20% of that is nuclear. The other 20% of that is solar and wind. We're increasing wind. In fact, I just heard a presentation that said the pipeline of new projects coming into ERCOT, the grid that we have here, is 100% renewable, and it's enough to replace everything that we already have. So there's plenty of opportunity to put that in. The rest of the grid that we have in Texas today is about 40% gas and about 20% coal, 25% now. Coal is declining. Even with a coal plant, the stationary coal plant runs at about 40% efficiency. Stationary gas can run at about 80% efficiency. Your average internal combustion engine in your car runs at about 15% efficiency. So even if you use electricity from a large fossil fuel plant, you're going to emit less if you have an electric vehicle in every circumstance in the U.S. today.
Okay. This is an interesting question. I'm sorry, that was actually for the whole panel. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
I was going to say what he was going to say.
Exactly.
I guess what I would add to that, though, is that, but it is a good thing from a policy perspective for us to be able to shift over to being 100% renewable, because we just get an even better bang for the buck. We become even more efficient. So I think those
we're
things
moving
should
that
go
way
hand in
very
hand.
rapidly, actually.
Okay. This is an interesting question. The presentations were very urban-centric. How is rural America best included in this revolution and not left behind? Let's start with you.
So I did do a panel last year about how you can use new modes of transportation to connect urban to suburban to rural, because there are many goods and services that people in rural America or rural communities around the world have to go to urban centers for. And so the big challenge is right now, if they're limited to car travel, that's quite difficult. So urban air mobility does have a very specific use case to be able to get people at relatively fast speeds across large distances on the order of 100 to 200 miles, which would cover both rural centers relative to a city. So this is a very useful use case for it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't walk through all of the use cases. We're mostly focused on suburban environments. It just so happens that the areas that we've started are in the urban density, so they exist within the city of Houston, but are fairly suburban at a second blush. For rural environments, what we look to provide is the ability for folks to get whatever goods they need from their provider. And that, for us, means in the long term, getting to a place where the vehicle, whether it is a suburban or a rural environment, can connect, or the provider can connect to this local platform and deliver to their customer. So whether that customer is 2 miles or 20 miles, we wouldn't be able to make the delivery.
Okay.
For us, it's a bit unique because we are building this massive infrastructure project. But think about this. When you build a high-speed train, it's roughly the width of a county road. And when you want to move more people because of the exponential growth that Texas is experiencing, you just run the trains more frequently, as opposed to building a highway, expanding lanes, access roads, development, rinse and repeat, and getting more and more entrenched, using more and more land. And so this is the most efficient and cleanest way to move the most people with the least impact. And I think we will need to do this more frequently over time to make sure rural Texas stays rural, frankly.
I want to speak specifically to those folks who live in rural areas who like to drive trucks, pickup trucks. Please wait 2 years. Okay? Ford, GM, Atlas, Rivian, Tesla will all have models available for you to purchase. It will be a little bit more expensive than the Platinum F-150 you were planning to buy, maybe. Might be the same price, but you will pay 1/4 the amount of cost to fuel it, which every truck driver that I know moans about the cost of filling up their pickup. There's no difference if you live on a farm or if you live in town. Those pickups will provide utility. The beauty about living on a farm, you probably have some space where you could set up your own solar and you could produce your own power for a lot less than what you're paying the rural co-op today. So to me, it seems like a great opportunity for rural people to go electric and enjoy the benefit.
Okay. A slightly different question, but quite interesting, actually. Good evening. I am a student here at the university with a growing interest in doing research. Unfortunately, despite this interest, I don't know what question I would like to answer. So I would like some inspiration. Obviously a student and not a faculty member. What are 2 problems each of your teams have faced while exploring energy innovation? And what are some of the positive and negative effects of your or your competitors, if you want to put it that way, proposed projects? Start with her. Holly, we'll start with you.
Start with me. Oh, gosh. You know, it's a drive to be, the biggest challenge is the drive to be ever more efficient, right? It's a lighter train, it's a more energy efficient train, it's improving upon the regenerative braking, it's putting battery backups in the train so if there is an issue, you can make it to the next station. Our teams, you know, I have to say, we've got a really great partnership between our teams and CenterPoint and the other energy companies, but I think it's going to be, how do we make sure that all of that is seamless? I'm not sure that exactly answered that question, but I think the study for us is going to be more of a human behavior study as opposed to an energy study.
Okay, okay.
Sure. So 2 issues that we've run into. One that's essentially kind of solved itself a little bit for us. And the second that, if you're looking for research topics, might be a good one. The first is because our vehicle is lighter, narrower, smaller than your standard vehicle, the trade-off between essentially the battery size and the amount of load for essentially like dry mass was less difficult than if we were essentially putting this in a Tesla or in a new Rivian truck. And so that kind of resolved itself. The second thing is, of course, we want to squeeze out as many deliveries as we can from the battery when it is charged. And for us, that is a bit of a logistics and operational question. So this idea of local commerce is not just about sort of a talking point and good for us to do this, but it actually makes a ton of business sense. If we can essentially have the bot go from Kroger to someone's home, to Shipley's, to someone else's home, to, to Torchy's, and then to someone else's home. Each of those deliveries actually squeezes out just a bit more efficiency of the battery of the bot that we've charged. And so the more that we can do that, the more efficient we can be, the more deliveries we can do, the more money we can make. So if you've got a great solution, we are hiring.
Okay.
So maybe I'll answer the first question first, just because I'm a professor and I deal with students all the time, undergraduates and graduate students. So I think it's really important to find something that you feel passionate about. And I think if you're passionate about technology, look for technologies that will solve problems, like solve society's challenges, as opposed to technology for convenience, because I think you could feel more passionate about it and you can impact more people across the world. And there's just so many things you can come up with in that area. And I would say for us, our challenges oftentimes revolve around the fact that we're a really tiny company. We have very few people. We're a startup. I worked for the government for most of my life, where you've got everything available to you from an infrastructure perspective and everything from a talent pool perspective. So when you're a tiny company, you have to choose really carefully as to who you bring onto the team. And so one of the ways to solve that is to partner with other people who have that expertise, so that you can focus on something that you're good at and you can make use of the much larger industrial space. So we literally, as of yesterday, we had our press release, we partnered with Spirit Aerostructures, who's an enormous aerostructures provider. So they're going to help us as a little company learn more about the FAA certification process. So, but our biggest challenges oftentimes are related to the size of our company.
Okay. Norm?
I think for us, in the many different startup companies we've had dealing with issues related to how to combat climate change and deal with energy, the number one thing is leadership. So you can talk about all the technology stuff. There's clearly a huge number of problems with that that are going to be exciting to work on. But what's most important is to lead with your talents, lead on persuading people what to do, and get on the challenge.
Okay. Got a question here for Anita and for Shola with regard to autonomous vehicles specifically. Do you see the vehicles being more of a taxi Uber system where 90% of the cars are owned by companies for rent, or more like today's car ownership model where 80% of vehicles are owned by people?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've actually looked at both models. In the short term, because of the maintenance and the issues, most technicians and mechanics that you would take these vehicles would have no idea what to do with them. What makes the most sense is for us to sort of keep this in-house. But in the longer term, there is a question of what could make sense. So we are open to those.
And so for the urban air taxi model, the mobility as a service model, ride-sharing model in the sky, the aircraft would not be owned by private individuals. It would be owned by operators. And so those operators would be the ones providing the pilots, most likely doing the maintenance, operations, refueling, in this case batteries, and then people would simply ride that service. So we don't really envision a use case where we would sell directly to a private individual, with the exception of governments, fire departments, and private companies.
Another question, and it was originally addressed to Shola, but could conceivably be addressed to others, with the possible exception of Holly here. How do we address the loss of jobs that autonomous vehicles create, and the lack of relationships by not putting a human face to a business? I think that was where the
absolutely.
came to you.
And that's a great question. So a lot of the partnerships that we had today have come from us going out and saying, hey, we are really interested in providing delivery services for you. Would you like to have a conversation with us? Domino's, I think, is a great example, where we were at CES and they walked up and they said, hey, we have over 20,000 open delivery driver jobs. We can't fill them. And the problem with most of these jobs is that 7 o'clock on Friday, we need all 20,000, but at 11 o'clock on Wednesday, we really don't need any of them, right? And so if you think about what's occurring now, most of these services either are so prohibitively expensive that they aren't used that much, or they are very, very seasonal and sort of have their peaks and troughs. And really that allows for us to fill in what is a gap that people really don't even think about. The second part of this is that we are hiring, and we think of this a bit of as a cottage industry. Autonomous vehicles are coming, and they are coming to stay. And the mechanics, the safety operators, even the folks, so Kroger, Walmart, Domino's, have all hired people to load these vehicles, and that has been a large part of where we have seen this growth in employment. So I don't think of it necessarily as a loss of jobs, as much of a shift, right? I think we will see this shift. Some of the jobs will be much better than the ones that were left behind. Some of them we don't even really sort of think of as existing today, but will exist in the future. In regards to that relationship, between businesses and their customers. That is something that we are very cognizant of, and we work really closely with our partners. Many of them, particularly Domino's, really loves being the face and having and interacting, and we don't have a problem with that. Our goal is essentially to make the delivery happen. There are ways and means that we connect, whether it be someone from Domino's or our own personal support team, with someone who's standing at the other end of a bot. So you might lose the face, but you're not going to lose the interaction.
Okay, great. So we'll just like to have a short wrap up here. Give each panelist 20 or 30 seconds to summarize, help the audience understand perhaps some important things that maybe we haven't touched on or anything like that. So we'll start with Norm.
Okay, so thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone. It's been really a pleasure to be here today. So the interstate touches everybody's life in the U.S. very frequently. Here in this room, almost daily basis. It's a great and wonderful infrastructure investment that we've made over almost a century. And we need to continue to make it even more relevant as we go forward. We have to make it climate proof, which means we need to remove petroleum from its power of propulsion and go electric. And we need to take advantage of other technologies that we have coming out to make it safer, faster, cheaper. And we can do all of that. We're going to see it unfold over the next 15 to 30 years. It's going to take some time, but we can see a pathway of continuing to use that massive investment and make it even better for our country.
Okay, Holly.
I would just say stay tuned, stay engaged. There's a lot of milestones that are going to happen this year, and we look forward to putting a bunch of people to work, to saving a bunch of lives, to helping with the effects on the climate, as well as to delivering you safely back and forth in between Houston and Dallas, where I always have to remember where I am, which means you don't have to stay in Dallas. So I look forward to giving you a ride.
But you could stay in College Station. Cool.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful being here this evening. Our vehicles, you may see our Prius vehicles that are doing testing out on the road. We're quite excited for R2 to hit the roads. A major proponent, and I don't think I really spoke about this quite a bit, is the safety aspect of this. So our vehicle is slower. When you see it, you can wave to it for quite a long time because it goes that slow. And the goal is safety, right? Like we want to be able to very conveniently, safely deliver people's goods, take on their errands, and we think that it is the future.
So thanks to the wonderful work by all my panelists here, most ground-based transit is becoming fully electric, which is fantastic, which means that right now, even though aviation actually represents a pretty small CO2 output, it's going to become a huge CO2 output if we don't do something to fix that. So urban air mobility with its short-range use case actually kickstarts the electric aviation revolution, and from that, with better batteries and eventually hydrogen fuel cells, air travel can be fully emission-free in the next 10 to 20 years.
Great. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the symposium. I think we've had 4 really interesting leading-edge projects that could have a big impact on the transportation revolution. And they're not just ideas. They're actual projects and products that are underway and in the process of being implemented. So hopefully you'll find it as exciting as I did. I'd like to thank all our panelists for coming. It's been very And as always, thanks to Ramanan, U of A Energy, CenterPoint, our sponsor, and all the support staff at Energy, Lauren, and all the people at Houston Public Media for putting on such a first-class event. I wish I had this kind of support in my lowly Bauer event. Okay?
Thank you, Greg. And thank you to the speakers for your presentations. Our thinking is enriched by the insights you shared with us this evening. Anita, you're bringing us science fiction. I can't wait to ride in those planes of the future. It's amazing. Shola, I heard that you were so inspirational that there is now an autonomous vehicle, a neuro-inspired autonomous vehicle that's going to be at the reception.
Oh, wonderful.
Holly, I'm blown away by the way Texas Central navigates a complex multi-stakeholder environment to bring an incredible project to our region. And Norm, you already know what a big fan I am of yours, and I can't wait to get on those highways where I just drive in a lane and it charges my car. Really appreciate all these expert voices. And I also appreciate everyone who showed up tonight, everyone who decided that moving your region forward is important to you, important enough for you to show up on a Tuesday night and learn something about it and figure out what you can do about it. And you've heard these expert voices, but there's an expert voice that we still need, and that's yours, the voice of the customer. The voice of the customer keeps innovation focused on the right things. And a good example of how you can make that voice heard is if you go to Evolve Houston's booth out front, there is this survey, and you may have found it on your seat, and it's got what everybody's favorite thing, a QR code. Who doesn't love a good QR code, am I right? So my dad asked me, what the hell do I do with a QR code? And I told him that you can actually just use your phone. If you open up the camera on most phones and just use your camera to look at a QR code, it'll probably pop up your browser window, and you can just navigate that way. This will take you to a survey where you can tell Evolve Houston what you would like to see for electric vehicles, and that will help move our region forward. You can also go to the reception after this and talk to all of these experts and let them know your ideas and what it is you'd like to see, and that will help move our region forward. And if you haven't test-driven an electric vehicle already, come find me. I've got a stack of business cards. And if you come get a business card from me and send me an email saying that you want to test drive an EV, I will make sure that that happens. So thank you again to all the speakers. Thank you to Greg, Dr. Christian Murdy, and the university. CenterPoint Energy is your trusted energy provider for any electrified transportation project you're undertaking. Thank you.